Is he circumcised? Catherine asked. Can you imagine what his anus is like? Describe it to me. My description of Vaughan continued, more for Catherine's benefit than for my own. She pressed her head deep into the pillow, right hand in a fierce dance as she forced my fingers to manipulate her nipple. Although stirred by the idea of intercourse with Vaughan, it seemed to me that I was describing a sex act involving someone other than myself. Vaughan excited some latent homosexual impulse only within the cabin of his car, or driving along the highway. His attraction lay not so much in a complex of familiar anatomical triggers, a curve of exposed breast, the soft cushion of a buttock, the hair-lined arch of a damp perineum, but in the stylization of posture achieved between Vaughan and the car. How are we doing, folks? I'm mckay, and today we're going to be taking a look at J.G. Ballard's Crash. This one was first published in 1973, and it has, as probably most of you know, been turned into a film by David Cronenberg that came out quite a number of years later. I mean, I've just finished this, so this feels fucking weird. How do I even describe what I've just read? That's what I'm trying to get my head around. Hallucinatory seems to be the right word. This whole book feels like some kind of dystopian, I wouldn't say nightmare, but more that the world feels dead in a sense. Like even though there's a lot of eroticism, there's obviously fetish going on, innumerable sex acts, most of them pretty depraved. There's something about this that really gets under your skin a little bit and just kind of sits there, almost like a parasite, and then starts to work its way into you. So at the beginning of the story, we meet our narrator, who is Ballard, by the way. But you don't really learn much more apart from that, apart from it is supposed to be told from a fictionalized version of the author, I assume. And he works from basically near the end, where he's telling us about Vaughan, this character, shall we say, who's been obsessed with the crash of Elizabeth Taylor that he wants to see happen later on. And he gets sexual gratification from car crashes, much like our narrator does, and all of the characters involved, it seems. And we kind of just go from there, really. I wouldn't really say there's much of a plot. There are moments in it where it progresses and characters stay with you, and it does have kind of advancements within it. But to be honest, I found the whole thing not really about that as I was reading it. And it did take me a while to get into it, at least 4 or 5 chapters. They're quite short, so that's forgivable. But at the same time, because of I wouldn't say monotonous, but it was a testing kind of tone going on to it. And until I kind of realised that was kind of the point, then from there on out, I could derive a lot more enjoyment from it, because I was looking at it, searching for things that this novel was never going to provide. And by that, I mean, most of us would look at what happens in this and kind of think, oh, that would be tragic for the, character involved and things like that. But because they actively seek out these crashes and actually get off on them a lot of the time, then it kind of flips it on its head. And it made me start to question, so what is this really trying to say? And then
I think I kind of clocked at least one part of it when it was really, it wasn't man driving the car, it was car driving the man. And there was a kind of marriage between the technological advancement of this time with this kind of machinery and the sexual gratification that can be derived from it, mainly because it all connects with the death drive that is, no pun intended there, that is inherent in each human being. And there is something about driving an automobile that does actually tick that box. Just the general idea of it happening, and because you know that you are entering a literal death machine, not necessarily for you but potentially for somebody else every time you get in one of these things, that there is a kind of perverse nature in that within itself. And I think what Ballard was doing with that was just taking it to its very, very extreme. Other parts of it I found to be fucking hilarious. Mainly, I'm not sure that was intended, but there were just moments during it where I was just kind of like, this is so absurd and so utterly ridiculous that it's impossible not to laugh at certain moments, especially when he's describing like the indenture of a dashboard and the Kool-Aid or coolant, sorry, by the side and the semen dripping down it. I mean, the word semen comes up in pretty much every chapter from what I could tell, not to mention vulva, pubis, anal, anus, and it's got everything in it. I mean, the whole thing basically is a kind of dance macabre where you'll take every extreme possible. There's violence, there's fantasies, I mean, all of them are kind of sociopaths as well. They're not emotional people within the least. I mean, there's no emotion in it, essentially. So and there's also a reference to Albert Camus, because that's one of the car reenactments they want to reenact, mainly just so they can get off on it. And it is kind of ironic that that is in there for both the reason that Camus obviously did die in a car crash and the fact that this features kind of emotionless characters, which obviously Meursault was very much like throughout the majority of The Outsider. But this... that's probably where the only coincidence kind of comes into play. And yeah, once you can get beyond that, it kind of reads like deadened poetry in a sense. Like it's difficult for me to describe it as a novel. I mean, it's forgivably short, because I think if it was any longer, it would have been a bit too much. I mean, as well as it being this kind of weird, lyrical, very descriptive and perverse progression of a story per se, it was also repetitive throughout, and partially in moments I found that a little grating, but at the same time it did feel like a journey, so you could just sit back. I mean, there's so many unintended puns I'm going to have in this, but there is literally a ride, the whole thing. And you do start to just question your own sexuality throughout. I'm going to be honest, some of this was hot. What can I say? And I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a car crash again without this fucking book coming into my mind a little bit, because there is this kind of hunger for death, and the idea that the ultimate orgasm is death itself, which I believe has been theorized a number of times. You just kind of have it in your head like, yeah, okay, that's what it's all kind of talking about in a way. Ballard actually references at the end, it has a little kind of bit which I did appreciate, because it gave just quite an interesting insight. So first off, what I found to be quite intriguing was, confronted with an early and much longer draft of Crash, a reader for his publisher famously sent a note that ran, "This author is beyond psychiatric help. Do not publish." Thankfully that was ignored, but it's interesting that he put a much longer draft, because I do think he derived it originally from a short story that he wrote before. Apparently that was quite common with Ballard. And yeah, it was wise to cut it down, because if this was much longer than what it is, I think it would have it would have been detrimental to its overall message, which is hard to find. Even if you're the most astute reader, I would dare to say, fucking hell, moron. Hey, look, that's my death drive coming out, trying to burn myself alive for you bastards. There we go. I chose to completely accept the demands of the subject matter, which was to provoke the reader by saying that car crashes are good for you. You thoroughly enjoy them. They make your sex life richer. They represent part of the marriage between sex, the human organism, and technology. I mean, I'm not surprised this caused a lot of outrage back in 1973, to be honest, because that is such an era that is only really getting into the reality of what technology is going to do to us. And I do find it quite interesting, the insights he has regarding the psychological effects it has on us having these things such as motorways and airports where there's just road ahead of you and that's about it. And with that, the billboards and the kind of, the Ballard works as a kind of TV production dude who's in charge of like commercials and what have you. But they're more interested in using it to create car crashes. And the Vaughn character, who he's obsessed with sexually as well as in every other sense, he's completely, basically willing to die for what he does, and does. I mean, that's the beginning of the novel, but I found that the most interesting, mainly because of how dead everything felt in the first place. And I actually think that extends to a lot of things, like beyond cars as well. Like, I do think the obsession with death drives a lot of what we do. If you look at things from taking drugs, there is an element of teasing death with that. There's the element of being obsessive. Also, even getting tattoos, in a sense, is you are killing the old person you were before you get the new tattoo a lot of the time. And it's all involved with pain. Obviously, car crashes are fucking painful, but also so are tattoos, so are being a drug addict, so are being, abusive and aggressive. Like, there's an element of the only way we feel alive is through our obsession with death. And because we are obsessed with things that are essentially, inanimate, therefore dead already. Even as far as buildings, they're dead. They do nothing. An automobile doesn't do anything unless we operate it. So in a sense, that's alive, but only under our volition. But that's changing now anyway. And yeah, we strive for it in many, many different caveats. And this novel, in that regard, is pretty damn ahead of its time. And Ballard's, to give him his due, he's got some fucking chops when it comes to writing. He's very majestical within this piece. And I'm intrigued to read some more of his stuff now, just to see how differently he approaches other kind of structures and novels. Because I can imagine that his range of books probably differentiate quite a bit from each other. And I think this one, I dare to say, might be a slight anomaly, mainly because it has to stick so much to that subject matter which he spoke about, or that's what he chose to do. And I do think he succeeds, although he doesn't make for the most enjoyable read at times, mainly because it's almost like it's so dream-esque that you kind of get lost within the prose at times. And I did find myself backtracking a little bit, especially at the beginning, just to kind of clarify what the fuck's going on. But really, when I stopped doing that and just kind of went with it, I seemed to just flow with the whole thing and just accept what's going on. It's like, there's more semen hitting the windscreen. Now it's running down some, young prostitute's breasts. The guy's staring at the other guy, recording him doing it, and all these things. And it's very, very graphic. But it's almost like, maybe it's because I'm a pervert, but I didn't actually find it shocking in the least. It was just a bit like, that's just this world. And for these people, it's totally normal. Since they are all basically psychopathic in a lot of ways. I mean, the guy's married, but they don't give a shit. And that's probably the most erotic thing I found in it, a way. Like, there's this kind of, they're kind of like a couple where they're just accepting of who they are. They both know that they want other things, and they talk to each other about all these sexual exploits they've been getting up to, and that turns them on. And although that is quite far out there, I found it kind of erotic. I have to admit, I just found that kind of relationship to be, probably because I'm getting older and, you know, I need more extremity to be turned on or aroused or whatever. But yeah, I found that to be charming in some ways, and funny as well. I mean, she's talking to him about how much Vaughn interests her, but she's also I think Catherine was her name. She's more interested in what Ballard would want to do to him, and how he wants to fuck him, and she keeps asking him what she thinks of his cock and all this kind of stuff. And it was just fucking funny as hell, and oddly intriguing. And again, about the car crashes thing, I don't think I'll be able to look at them in the same way anymore, which is odd to say. I wouldn't have guessed that, because I've seen the film a long time ago, mind you, and I probably wasn't old enough to really conceptualize the whole idea of it. But I would say that it does definitely stick and respect the book a lot. Like, I think Cronenberg did a very good job, because he, even especially in its aesthetic, it really is portrayed beautifully. And it was difficult to get that out of my head in places, because it was just kind of lingering there. You got that kind of dark neo-noir, dystopian kind of landscape. Everything's kind of, there's an eroticism just to that in itself a lot of the time. There's kind of tinkering on danger and aggression and violence, and the fact that things move slowly makes them kind of more threatening in a weird way, mainly because you don't know when it's suddenly going to fucking, you know, prang, basically. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Crash. It's an experience, I'll say that much, and definitely worth checking out. But I'd try to go into it without any expectations whatsoever. Don't worry about anything else, and just kind of let it get inside you, essentially. Which it will, I'm pretty sure. But at the same time, be patient. For at least in my experience, I found the beginning to be a bit arduous. But once I kind of accepted the world for what it was literally portraying, because there isn't any kind of like underlying message, really. I do think overall there is a kind of there is a message, but at the same time it's quite subtle, and it's kind of on face value a lot of the time. You won't be looking into the character development or anything like that. Like, nothing really changes in that regard. But that's kind of the point. It's like there is a deadened reality to the whole thing. And it made for a very different read, I have to admit. Probably the most out there novel I've featured so far, which is, you know, a pretty big feat in itself, I would say. And for those reasons, I would recommend it quite highly. I don't know how highly I'd rate it, if I'm honest. At this moment in time, I'd probably give it a 4, maybe a 3 on a harsher day. So, yeah. But it depends what you're after in a novel. If you just want some pure erotic sexual fantasies getting pretty damn explicit, and of all kind of varieties, but as long as it's inside a fucking car, then, you know, that's the book for you. If you were looking for something more conventional, then I don't think you'd take to it very easily at all. So yeah, there you go. That's been my review of Crash. Thank you very much for watching this, and I'll see you soon. Bye.